Jo Nadin, thank you very much for your time. The Talk of Pram Town. Tell us a little bit about the Talk of Pram Town.
It tells the story of three generations of what I think a lot of people would just call Essex girls. It switches between 1969, when 17-year-old Connie, who's exasperated by her strict mother and her small town life in Harlow, decides to run away from home. And then it comes to 1981, when on the day of the royal wedding, Connie's 11-year-old daughter, Sadie, wakes up to find her mother, Connie, dead, and she's sent back to Essex, to Harlow, to live with her estranged grandparents. And what follows is the story of Sadie trying to find her real father in Harlow, and Jean, the grandmother, coming to find the real Connie after all these years.
And what is your connection with Harlow?
Originally, my father worked at Gilbeys for years, so we were often in Harlow for various things at the big gin distillery, which I loved. I thought it was the most amazing building. And then I did my sixth form at Harlow College. I lived in Saffron Walden, not too far away, but they didn't do exciting subjects at the county high for A-level, and so I came to Harlow.
And you immediately mentioned the Gilbeys. There's those iconic buildings. Are those images still quite fresh in your mind?
Yes. And it was quite a shock. I came back to Harlow for the first time in a long time, about 2 or 3 years ago, when I was writing the book, and the differences were quite stark. I couldn't quite find my way around the town in the same way that it was second nature to me, because I was there every day for 2 years. And it's changed massively. So the Harlow in my head is very much the Harlow of 1987, 1988.
Is your book, and keen for Harlow people to read this book, is it an affectionate look at Harlow?
It's interesting. It's the characters, the grandmother, Jean, and Connie both have reasons for disliking it. Connie wants to run away from there because she can't understand why you'd live in Harlow when you could be in London. London is bright lights, big city to her. Jean finds it. Jean is a snob, and she doesn't like that she's moved from effectively a working class slum in London and thought she was bettering herself, and then finds that everyone else that she was living with in London has moved with her. So they're quite snobby. It's 11-year-old Sadie who finds delight in it, who is far more akin to my real feelings, I suppose. She has the affection for it as a newcomer, which is exactly what I had. I thought it was an amazing place. It was like being in America, because Saffron Walden is quite small and parochial. It's a medieval town, but Harlow had these wide avenues that had numbers instead of names. And it was incredibly glamorous to me as a teenager.
And what was the writing process? When did you first think of the idea of this book, and how long has it taken you to write this book?
I already had one book out, The Queen of Bloody Everything, and I'd written a follow-up book for that and a 2-book deal. But then I'd started to think of another story about a difficult family, about 3 generations of women. And I pitched it to my publisher, and they loved it and said, you need to write that quickly, and we'll swap that round with the book 2 that's supposed to come out. And it was only during that time, so this was probably 3 years ago, and I was trying to work out where to set it. And I'd originally thought I'd set it again in Saffron Walden, because Queen of Bloody Everything is set there. And it just wasn't working. And I can't remember how or why it came to me, but I thought, well, what if they lived in Harlow instead? It's a completely different feel to Saffron Walden. And then I started thinking about Harlow itself and the creation of the town and how it came to be built. Obviously, old Harlow has always been there, always, for a long, long time. But the new town is a completely different thing, and it was very cleverly engineered. And the more I researched that, the more the book actually became about the building of Harlow as well. And in fact, one of the characters is on the Development Corporation and helped design Harlow itself. So it goes into some of that history as well in the book.
There's concern. I know we're here to talk about your book, but you brought in things like development corporations and Gilbeys. There's a concern that Harlow, in the future, with things like the London, Stansted, Cambridge corridors and Gilston town, might lose its identity geographically and also sort of emotionally? Is it important that new towns preserve their character?
Yeah, I think so, because I certainly, it had such a character for me, and there were a couple of very distinct businesses that really summed up Harlow, and I feel very strongly that it needs to retain a distinct identity, and it was built for a good reason, and it had such a strong community feel to it when I was there. It was so different from Saffron Walden, which was it felt old school and snobby, and Harlow was different. There were different people there. It was much more multicultural. It was much more progressive, but still very community minded. And I would hope that it would retain that character.
I found when lived away from Harlow for 20. I got my A levels and went off to university in Stirling in Scotland. But I found that somebody said they were from Hampshire or Suffolk or Derbyshire. They go, all right. But when you're from Essex, oh, Essex, and that's 1981 to be continued. Have you found with your publicity that it's what we're doing with your book, people immediately hooking into, oh, Essex?
It's an interesting. For years, I was ashamed of being an Essex girl because I suppose I was a teenager in the late 80s. It was a time when Essex girls were absolutely derided. They were laughed at in Viz as the Sharon and Tracys. And I remember pretending in a BBC interview that I was from Cambridgeshire. I moved Saffron Walden over the border because I was embarrassed. And then as I got older, I and more political, and started to rail against those sort of staid attitudes. And now I'm very, very proud of it, and proud of my heritage and of all the brilliant women I know who come from Essex. I think we're still defying expectations. If you say you're an Essex girl and then you turn out to be, spectacle wearing, you're a doctor of literature, and that's not what they're expecting to see. And I kind of like that.
A couple more questions before we go is that you've name checked the square at the front of your book.
I have. It was. I loved it there. We had gigs in Saffron Walden, but the square felt like a real proper venue where bands could be discovered, and I spent so many weekend nights there. I was going out with a guy who was the lead singer in a band, and they played there a lot. And I remember being there, and Steve Lamacq, who's now incredibly famous, used to be in the square all the time scouting bands. I think he was a reporter at the NME at the time, and everyone went there. All my friends went there. That's where we hung out.
Did you think, I'm sorry to veer into the political area or back to planning committees, do you think now it's gone that people like councils, if you build a new town, you can build a damn music venue? Discuss.
Well, this is what I find amazing about Harlow. It built so many amenities, so many incredible things that other towns would be amazed at. I couldn't believe how many community centres there were. I couldn't believe those all the pubs with the butterfly names, and one was built in each little precinct. Hatches they were called, weren't they, instead of precincts? And then to not have a music venue all of a sudden it's shocking to me. And other things that I think I don't know if it's still there. There used to be a dry ski slope, and the pool. I really hope the pool is still there. But that pool was amazing when I was a child.
I hate to break it to you, but the ski slope meant many years ago. The pool has gone. There is a place called the Leisure Zone, but I think one of the things people find is that you had the sports centre, and it was relatively cheap. And now they look at the prices you'd have to pay. I've just had a press release regarding a 5 days football summer school, £200. Supposing you've got 3 children. Now, would that have happened in the 70s? That would have been for free.
Well, and actually that's something that is touched on in the book. There's a big camp. It's a Bible camp, which we actually had in Saffron Walden. But things like that were free back then. And yeah, it was a cheaper way of life. I guess it's, I find it sad. I find it sad that these places are disappearing, and all those incredible amenities that made Harlow such a sort of lure for me And then when I came back, it was starting to look dilapidated and things were boarded up and gone. And it was I felt very sad seeing it in such a different, through different eyes, obviously, but it did feel it was in a different state.
So finally, to conclude, to the 85,000 residents of Harlow, why should they go and purchase your book?
Because they might recognise some of themselves in it, and they'll recognise the places. And it is, even though two of the characters have struggles with Harlow and find it difficult living there, it is a book that really is a love letter to a town that I found amazing and that is just stuck in my heart and will always be so.